Welcome to the Ready to Read the Bible series. This is the first of 12 lessons that will give you a broad overview of the entire Bible and also teach you some skills that will make you a better Bible reader. The first book, Genesis, lays a solid foundation for the other 65 books of the Bible. Moses wrote this book during the 40 years that he and the Israelites spent wandering in the wilderness. Genesis begins at the beginning, with the creation of the world, and it ends at the time of Joseph's reign in Egypt. This single book spans more than 2,000 years of human history. Let's take a look at the major characters and events in Genesis. It opens with a brief description of how the physical world came to be, otherwise known as the story of creation. The ancient Israelites were heavily influenced by the Egyptians, who believed that many gods and goddesses were responsible for creating and sustaining life on earth. Moses informs his people that the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is greater than all of Egypt's gods put together, and that he is the one who created everything without the help of pagan gods. But we'll come back to this later in the lesson. God created Adam in his own image. God also created Adam's wife Eve and placed them in the Garden of Eden. The first home for Adam and Eve was a garden planted by God. In this garden was the tree of life. God tells Adam that he will live forever if he eats the fruit of this tree. But there is also a tree in the garden called the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. If Adam eats the fruit of that tree, he will die. Next we read about the fall of humanity. A serpent comes along claiming that God is lying to Adam and Eve when he says they will die if they eat from the tree of knowledge. Nevertheless, Adam and Eve eat the forbidden fruit, thereby showing that they don't believe what God has said. They side with the lying serpent instead of with their Creator, who is telling the truth. They're essentially calling God a liar. This seriously damages their relationship with God. He banishes them from the Garden of Eden, but in his kindness, he continues to help them and their children. The years go by, and the world's population increases. The descendants of Adam and Eve are extremely evil, so God makes the decision to destroy them in a great flood. However, Noah is a righteous man in the sight of God. Noah believes God and obeys when he is told to build a large boat called an ark that will be used to save his family and the animals from the great flood that will soon come upon the earth. Rain falls for 40 days and 40 nights. All the people and animals who are not in the ark drown, but Noah and all who are with him survive. After the flood, God places the rainbow in the sky as a sign to Noah and the animals that he will never again bring such a great flood upon the earth. Many years later, there's another righteous man named Abraham, who will become the father of many nations. Abraham obeys God and leaves his father's land to go to the land of Canaan. The promise God makes to Abraham is that he will have a son in his old age. Abraham believes God, and his faith is counted as righteousness. God also promises to give Abraham the land of Canaan as his inheritance. Isaac is the son God had promised to Abraham by his wife Sarah. Isaac inherits the promise God made to Abraham. He becomes the father of twin boys, Esau and Jacob. Jacob, though not the firstborn, receives the blessing and inheritance of the firstborn son by deceiving his father Isaac. Many years later, God changes Jacob's name to Israel. His descendants are called Israelites. Let's take a closer look at Jacob's descendants. Jacob married Leah and Rachel, who were sisters. Leah gave birth to Reuben, Simeon, Levi, and Judah. But her sister Rachel was very troubled because she was still childless. So Rachel gave her servant Bilhah to Jacob as her surrogate. Bilhah gave birth to Dan and Naphtali. Then Leah gave her servant Zilpah to Jacob. Zilpah gave birth to Gad and Asher. Then Leah had two more sons, Issachar and Zebulun. Finally, Rachel gave birth to her first son, Joseph. Then she died during childbirth when her son Benjamin was born. Jacob had 12 sons in all. Their descendants became known as the 12 tribes of Israel. They are also referred to as Israelites, Hebrews, or Jews. Joseph is one of Jacob's 12 sons. Young Joseph is sold by his jealous brothers and taken to Egypt against his will, where he later becomes the Pharaoh's right-hand man. Joseph interprets Pharaoh's dream that there will be 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine. During the 7 years of good crops, Joseph stores the extra grain. He then sells that grain during the 7 years of famine, saving countless lives and making Pharaoh very wealthy. Because of the great famine, the Israelites moved to Egypt. Joseph forgives his brothers and welcomes his extended family to Egypt. After the famine, the 12 tribes do not go back to the land of Canaan, but remain in Egypt for the next 400 years. As their population increases, the Egyptians see them as a threat and oppress them. God finally raises up Moses to bring them out of Egypt to the land he had promised to give Abraham's descendants. The story of their deliverance from slavery is recorded in the book of Exodus, which we will talk about in the next lesson.
Bible reading tip number 1, Authorial Intent. Authors write for many different reasons, such as to inform, persuade, entertain, or correct. An author works hard to choose just the right words to convey a message to the readers. The meaning of a text is set by the author. In the case of an ancient book like Genesis, we 21st century readers must try to understand what Moses was saying to his original audience in the context of their life in the Middle East about 4,000 to 5,000 years ago. Only after we understand what he meant to say to them can we accurately interpret the text and apply its principles to our own lives. Here's an example of the importance of authorial intent. Today there are many different interpretations of the biblical account of creation. Some scholars claim that God created everything in 6 consecutive days that were literal 24-hour days. Others read the Bible alongside scientific evidence that the earth is very old, and they claim that creation occurred in 6 time periods that were each millions of years in length. Still others say the creation story is merely an allegory made up of symbolic language and fictional characters that should not be taken literally at all. So how can we know which interpretation is correct? If we want to read the Bible well, then we must begin by asking ourselves, who was Moses and what did he intend to say to his original audience, the Israelites? Moses was a prophet, a judge, a military leader, and a national hero. He was not a scientist, nor did he use the scientific method. Genesis is not a science book. The scientific method as we know it today is attributed to Roger Bacon, who lived in the mid-13th century. Here's how the scientific method works. Ask a question, make observations, develop a hypothesis, conduct experiments, analyze the data, and draw conclusions, from which you ask another question and move through the whole process again.
Moses did not do this. He didn't make observations and conduct experiments to discover how or when the world was created. Rather, he was in direct contact with the Lord for decades and communicated what the Lord told him to the ancient Israelites. It was from this direct revelation that he wrote the creation account recorded in Genesis.
Now let's go a little further and look at the cultural context in which the Israelites lived. They had been immersed in Egyptian pagan practices for 400 years. The Egyptians had several different stories about how the world was created. Each of these myths involved the continuous work of multiple gods and goddesses. For example, they believed a god named Num molded people out of clay on his potter's wheel, and the goddess Heket would then breathe life into them. As long as these two deities kept working, life would continue. There were many other myths about how their gods controlled the weather, the sea, and every major aspect of their lives. But the account Moses gave of creation refutes all these other stories. Moses wrote a narrative to teach the Israelites that the Egyptians were wrong about creation. He wanted them to know that everything was created by one supremely powerful God, their God, the God of Israel.
Moses faced different questions than we do today. There was no creation versus evolution debate at that time. Nobody argued about young earth or old earth creationism. The real issue Moses had to face was polytheism versus monotheism. In other words, were there many gods or just one?
Moses believed that there is only one God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This belief was based on his direct relationship with the Lord, who had rescued his people from Egyptian slavery and cared for them while they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. Moses was certain that the Lord would also go with them into the Promised Land, and remain there with them for future generations, to provide and protect them from their enemies in a way no pagan gods ever could.
Now let's read from the book of Genesis, starting in chapter 1, verse 1. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness covered the surface of the watery depths, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the surface of the waters. Then God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and he called the darkness night. Evening came, and then morning, the first day. Then God said, "Let there be an expanse between the waters, separating water from water." So God made the expanse and separated the water under the expanse from the water above the expanse, and it was so. God called the expanse sky. Evening came and then morning, the second day. Then God said, "Let the water under the sky be gathered into one place, and let the dry land appear." And it was so. God called the dry land earth, and he called the gathering of the waters seas. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let the earth produce vegetation, seed-bearing plants and fruit trees on the earth bearing fruit with seed in it, according to their kinds." And it was so. And God saw that it was good. Evening came and then morning, the third day. Then God said, "Let there be lights in the expanse of the sky to separate the day from the night. They will serve as signs for festivals and for days and years." And it was so. God made the two great lights, the greater light to have dominion over the day, and the lesser light to have dominion over the night, as well as the stars. And God saw that it was good. Evening came and then morning, the fourth day. Then God said, "Let the water swarm with living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the expanse of the sky." So God created the large sea creatures, and every living creature that moves and swarms in the water, according to their kinds. He also created every winged bird according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. Evening came and then morning, the fifth day. Then God said, "Let the earth produce living creatures according to their kinds, livestock, creatures that crawl, and the wild life of the earth according to their kinds." And it was so. And God saw that it was good. Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, according to our likeness. They will rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, the livestock, all the earth, and the creatures that crawl on the earth." So God created man in his own image. He created him in the image of God. He created them, male and female. God blessed them and said to them, "Be fruitful, multiply, fill the earth, and subdue it. Rule the fish of the sea, the birds of the sky, and every creature that crawls on the earth." God saw all that he had made, and it was very good. Evening came, and then morning, the sixth day. So the heavens and the earth and everything in them were completed. By the seventh day God completed his work that he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work that he had done. God blessed the seventh day and declared it holy, for on it he rested from his work of creation.
This is only the beginning. We hope you will take the time to read the rest of the book of Genesis. It contains many fascinating stories that will give you important insight into how the Lord cares for the people he created and still loves. In the next lesson, we will explore the books of the Law of Moses.
Thank you for watching. See you next time.